our bar MBA program. Jasmine is the executive director of the Mid-Hudson Energy Transition since April of 2023, and is the first, actually permanent executive director. Previously, Jasmine has held roles including the Senior Equity and Affordability Advisor at the Building Decarbonization Coalition. She's also the Energy Justice Manager at the We Act for Environmental Justice and Sustainable Westchester. Jasmine is also on New York City's Climate Mobilization Advisory Board and the Sustainability Advisory Board, where she presents implementation recommendations for New York City's building decarbonization law and long-term sustainability plan for the city. Jasmine is, like I said, also currently an MBA student in sustainability at Bard College and holds a BA in environmental studies with a concentration in environmental policy and development from the University of Vermont. And in her limited free time, she can be found hanging out with her partner, Carolyn, who's joining us, and her adorable pup, Zero, who I met on Zoom. It's an honor now to introduce Crystal Johnson. Crystal Johnson is the Assistant Secretary of Environmental Justice for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, bringing over 25 years of expertise as a Senior Environmental Planner, Energy Strategist, and Sustainability Specialist. Crystal's work focuses on strategic planning, policy development, and assessments in energy equity, clean energy, efficiency of renewables, and environmental resources and management. She emphasizes sustainability in buildings and the human side of environmental policies. And Crystal's been recognized by the UN for her contributions to sustainability and has had significant advisory roles in Massachusetts. Further, Crystal holds a BS in Conservation and Resource Studies from the University of California, Berkeley. Thank you for joining us. Oleander Stone, pleasure to introduce Oleander. Oleander is the new Deputy Director of Climate Equity and Environmental Justice with the climate team at the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. In this role, they work to center accountable engagement and equity in the various initiatives of the climate team. Prior to this job, they were the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program Regional Coordinator for the Berkshires and Hill Towns, with a technical assistance focus on equity and engagement. And they went to graduate school at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where they studied geology with a focus on geologic carbon sequestration, which we're going to talk about, I'm sure, as part of this. That wasn't enough prep questions. And as a teenager, Oleander helped develop a native plant nursery and has continued to collect native seeds for propagation and can often be found giving plant matter to friends and neighbors. And a pleasure now to introduce Shamar Bibbins. Shamar is actually a student here at the Kennedy School, a mid-career MBA student, focused on environmental justice, public health, and economic inclusion, particularly for underserved communities. Since 2014, Shamar has served as a senior program officer for the environment program at the Kresge Foundation, leading the Climate Change, Health, and Equity Initiative. She's also served as the director of national partnerships at Green for All and serves on a number of boards as well. Shamar earned a bachelor's degree in science, technology, and society from Vassar College, and she's a yogi and enjoys hiking, running, writing, ocean views, and listening to music. I love how we include this in our notes. And last but not least, it's a pleasure to introduce Valeria Tiberi, who is our moderator, who's also a student at Harvard. She's getting her MBA at Harvard Business School, and is dedicated to solving climate and energy issues by fostering public-private partnerships and financing inclusive solutions. And before HBS, she was a consultant at Bain & Company, focusing on energy projects and ESG strategy. And she also co-founded Officina Italia, a nonprofit aimed at increasing young people's exposure to jobs in the public sector and training tri-sector entrepreneurs in Italy. So I will turn it over to Valeria now to ask the first questions. The microphone is off, so whoever gets it first, is it Jasmine?
Yes. Okay. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this amazing panel. Easy question, easy first question for all of you. So maybe Jasmine, you can start and then we can go down the line. You could have done anything with your lives. And environmental justice and climate equality is kind of like a big issue. So why did you decide to devote your careers and your lives to this topic in particular? What's your story?
All right, so I always knew that I wanted to go into some kind of environmental work. My mom was like, very love nature, and we always went to the little nature preserve and looking at the turtles. And so I went into University of Vermont knowing that I wanted to do something environmentally focused. And I think because of my identity as a biracial Black woman, as a queer woman, justice has always been important to me. I didn't know that I could actually do it as a job. I don't think that, what I do, which is particularly energy justice, was a hot topic 10 years ago when I was in college. And so for me, I had a kind of unconventional introduction to energy and climate work, which was, I came home from college and I was broke. I had 87 cents in my bank account, and I had to call my parents just to send me money so I could have gas to move home. And I one-click applied to a job on Indeed, and I got it. And it was to work on an energy program at Sustainable Westchester. I ended up spending 4 years there, and by the end of it, I was the program manager of our community choice aggregation, which is a bulk purchasing program for renewable electricity. Ended up serving 27 municipalities, over 115,000 households. And after 4 years, I was like, oh, I basically got a whole nother degree in energy. And so from there, I was able to learn about a job to do energy justice policy at We Act for Environmental Justice. And that was just my dream. I was like, this job exists, and I can do it, and they want me to do it. I was stoked. And so I went there. I went back into kind of the policy space after having done programs. I got recruited to go to Building Decarbonization Coalition after a bit of time, and then got recruited actually by my fellow board members. I was on the board of Mid-Hudson Energy Transition. Went on vacation with my girlfriend, came home, and they said, hey, we've been talking, Jasmine, and we want you to be the executive director. We're not getting, great candidates, and we really think you should do it. And I was like, what? I was like, you're joking. And they were like, no, we're not joking. And I was like, okay. So that's very much how I ended up here. But yeah, I couldn't have done anything, knew I wanted to do justice, and I would say that after being introduced to energy, it all kind of flowed naturally.
That's awesome. So justice was always a through line for me. By the time I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and my mom was an environmental science teacher, so the whole outdoors and connection to nature was very much a part of our lives. We would go up to the lake in the summer, but I didn't really think about it as a career at all. But by the time I went to college, I was very clear that I wanted to work on issues of justice and equity. I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and even though I grew up in Detroit and lived in neighborhoods that we would now call food deserts and all the industry in Detroit, I hadn't quite connected all the dots for myself by the time before I went to college. But it was in college where I had an internship my sophomore year, I think it was. I was working for a white-led environmental organization in Poughkeepsie, New York. And we were doing public engagement, kind of door knocking. I'm completely dating myself because this is when New York State had just instituted their mandatory recycling law, so way back. And we were doing canvassing in public housing about this. And it was a young Black woman who was a mother, probably not too much older than me at the time, and she just stopped me in my tracks. If you've ever done canvassing, it doesn't always go well. And she stopped me, in the middle of my spiel and said, I don't have time to sort my trash, I have to feed my babies. And I was like, right. And it was an aha moment for me as a young person that made me realize, of course, if I was going to be about this work, I wanted to make sure that people who look like me, communities that I come from, really could relate to the issues at hand, right? And so from that moment, I really became a student of kind of environmental justice, and I ended up doing my senior thesis on race class analysis around environmental policy. I got a Fulbright fellowship to go to Japan to study environmental equity issues there, and had every intention on me going to law school and being an environmental lawyer and fighting for the people. That was like my whole thing. And as life would have it, I did not start my career in the environmental field. For me at that time, I didn't see many people who looked like me in the movement. And as a young person at 21 coming out of college, it was very easy for me to be like, is this what I want to do? It didn't feel fun to me. It didn't feel inclusive. And so I actually ended up starting my career in sports and entertainment, and I worked in international television and media, and all of these things that were really cool I was passionate about as well. But thankfully, 10 years into doing that work, the work found me again, and I realized the work I was doing in media and PR was my passion, but it was not my purpose, and I knew that this work really was my purpose. And so I was just kind of, by the grace of God, found my way back into the environmental space and worked for a national nonprofit, did state and local work in California for a year, and then went to DC and did a lot of federal policy work, and then that took me to my current job, working in climate philanthropy at a national foundation, and which I'll share more about a little bit later. So that's my story.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Oleander. I'm like so taken in by your stories that I've somewhat forgotten the question. So,
Your story.
Yeah, it's a hard one. Let's see. I've never done a very good job doing things the way that it's supposed to be done. And that started at a very young age, and it ended up me dropping out of high school when I was 16. And I found my way into a little college called Simon's Rock, and you can go there when you're 16. And I tried to study environmental studies there a little bit, and I found my way into law, and I liked them both, but I was the first person in my family who had ever gone to college. I had never heard the word syllabus, I didn't understand what semesters were, and I was overwhelmed by an academic world. And so when I got done by the skin of my teeth, I tried to drop out of college. I was not allowed by the dean. She told me I had to finish. I'm grateful that I finished. And then I was so not inspired by academia that I did anything that I could do to get my hands on the earth. And I started farming. And I started a plant nursery. I started thinking a lot about the earth. I have a love of rivers, and there's nothing that makes me as happy as like walking in a river on a hot day, seeing it change. I do love floods. I know it's a bad thing, but I love how rivers change. I know it's bad for people, but I really like the dynamicism of rivers. And that was where my heart was okay. And so I live in a rural place, and I spend a lot of time thinking about why rural places are the way that they are, how conservation lands work, and about my access to those places. And then, this is a little bit dating too, my father was really worried about health insurance, because back at this time it wasn't like you could just like go and get, there was no Obamacare. And so I didn't really have a job that ever offered me insurance, and he was like, you need to get a job. So I was like, I know, I will go and become a teacher, and I will study geology because it's about the earth, so I'll do that. And I went and I got to UMass, and I was studying geology, and I was like, but what about, it turns out that I'm just a very intersectional thinker, and so then all of a sudden I was studying biogeochemistry, and I was looking at paleoclimatology, and I was looking at all these different things, and I got to this point in my work where I had to do a presentation to satisfy the requirements. And I didn't want to do it to the academic department. I wanted to go out into the community and give it to the people. I wanted them to understand what I was studying. And I was told that that didn't count, that talking to regular people about the work that I was doing did not count. and I didn't understand. So I got to think a lot about community engagement and what it meant to be in relationship with a community who was outside of what I was doing. And so from there, I started doing some more engagement work. I knocked on a lot of doors, doing work about energy efficiency, different types of things, and eventually found my way to working with the state, which I thought I was gonna hate because it's like the man and kind of the belly of the beast. But it turns out I love it. It's like a space that I oddly am able to function. Like I understand it, I see it as a system, and I enjoy finding the loopholes. It's like a bit of a puzzle of like, where are the opportunities for change? How do I meet new people? How do I make those connections? So it kind of works for my brain, and so I think that the way that I got here, and also just understanding that like climate and justice, like we can't move forward without justice. Like it is the guidepost of how we're gonna do anything right. So it's almost like there is no work without justice. And so that has always been a through line, the scaffolding of how to do work. So, your turn.
Thank you. So I'm Kresge Johnson, and for my story, in second grade, Arbor Day, I was given a tree, sapling, and a Ranger Rick magazine. I'm aging myself, so I don't think they're around anymore. And in the back of Ranger Rick, they had P.O. boxes, they didn't have websites. I learned about, you could send in information to learn about the Amazon, and that they were cutting it. And I remember saying to my mom, like, what's the Amazon? And did you know they're cutting it like 40 football fields a day? And it just made me aware. So I got more and more literature. And I found out years later that my mother began to hide the literature because she wanted me to morbid, right? And that started me on a path. And when we moved years later, that tree that I had planted, we took it with us to where we moved in high school. And I still go by that house and jump to look through the back fence to make sure the tree's okay. So those are some of the things that influenced me. When I went to college, it definitely tapped into what I knew before as far as being, intersectional. Where the word wasn't even then connecting, but understood social issues, environmental issues, and they weren't really yet connecting. And for me, it wasn't either or. But at the same time, I had a big activism background. And I also I went to Berkeley, and they're like, you can't graduate without being like, having a certain number of protests, and being like followed by security or something. And so it opened something in me. But when I went to go get a job, I worked in both energy and the environmental fields. And I noticed from my work that I say like good cop, bad cop, people who were always protesting, as I mentioned, for a particular intent. And I saw some of that being effective, and I saw some taking it longer, and I said, you know what? I'm gonna take a job in corporate America as an environmental planner, and as an energy planner, and also with some other state agencies, because I said, I don't want to be always on the outside protesting. Somebody's going to have to go inside that piece of the belly, and I'm going to do it. And so when I was in those positions, I remember one place at New York State DP for a project that not an NGO, CBO had been protesting for, I know, for like 15 years. Around if there's a drought, how there's water pulled from the Hudson and it causes fish impingement and entrainment. And one of the riverkeeper groups I knew of was very opposed to that. And I remember I was at a meeting and I went to the commissioner and I said, oh, you know what? I think we're just going to modify this. And he's like, okay. And I walked out and I'm like, some organizations, they had fundraisers, they protested it for 15 years, and it comes to sometimes being at the right place at the right time and positioning yourself and engaging. So that's one of the things that I did. Over time, when I was working at architectural engineering firms or such, I would bring my environmental sensitivity to projects. So when you're at these firms, you can have like 100 structural, mechanical, electrical, civil, other engineers, and about 3 of them are planners. And planners tell them, oh, that sounds a good idea, but you can't do that because you're going to have adverse impacts in like one of these 17 categories. And I found that I had to quickly learn messaging, because at the time, especially in the 90s, here I am as, now everything is more equitable. Back then, especially even in Boston, as a Black woman in there wasn't even a PWI, it was just all white engineering firm and all white male, I'm coming in and saying, you can't do that. And a lot of these people were older white males. And I said, I need them to listen, not get triggered, because I need an outcome on this that goes around any of their hang-ups. And that made me learn messaging and engagement. Because of that, I was asked to come to meetings because I bridged gaps between the planners and the archaeologists, and then the structural, didn't like the civil. Like, it wasn't DEI training for differences, it was training for differences in technical backgrounds and stereotypes, that way. And they said, you're helping people come together when there's inertia, which saves money and time. So then, after a while, it turned into, I said, let's do it with community work. And when I was working at the Aeronautics Commission, I said, we're going to engage the community differently. We're not going to have a table. We're going to meet with them. We're going to have foods that their grandmothers would have. And I just started to do engagement in a different way. And it led to, over the years, changing from one type of engagement to really just being around equity, and there's energy equity and so forth. So now, after having 31 years experience as a senior environmental planner and an energy analyst in these different areas of engagement and community work, it's picked up to be like, oh, it's about energy burning now, it's about energy efficiency, it's about environmental racism, and now I'm thankful that all that culmination has given me the opportunity to serve as assistant secretary, where I get to bring environmental background, energy, and engagement, and a sensitivity to how do you engage with others who may not understand what environmental justice equity is, and they can have misunderstandings, which can trigger fears and a backlash. And saying, as equal as I'm excited to engage and drive something forward, I also have to hold on to something that we don't want to lose, because they need to also learn, and I have to spend energy on being aware of how to mindfully engage them as well as the others. So it's a fascinating balancing, but I love it.
Thank you. Can we just bring a round of applause for it was so inspiring. Thank you. It was super candid and inspiring. Okay. Thankfully, I have questions. So you share your personal stories and your journey to get where you are today. But maybe now, can you talk a bit more about the theory of change of the organizations you're currently working at? What's your day-to-day role? What are your responsibilities? A lot is going to be about community engagement, but that would be great. And maybe this time we can start with Crystal.
Thank you. Okay, great. So in my current office at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, I'm in the Office of the Secretary under Office of Environmental Justice and Equity. And one of the things regarding theory of change, and if I'm understanding that's the intent, is, and I now understand if I go somewhere, what to ask. Because one of the things that I value is that with the new government administration, the Haley Driscoll administration, what they advanced regarding prioritizing and commitment to environmental justice and equity, not just with their statements, but also then with their funding and their structure. So one of the things that changed in my group was, while they always had an Undersecretary of Energy and Environment, to put it on an equal level field, they made an Undersecretary of Environmental Justice, Maria Balaam-Howard, who I work for. That was significant, because rather than EJ being in the corner or by itself, it was equal, and it goes across everything. They also added an Undersecretary of Climate. but EJ goes across all of them, and being in the office of the secretary, oversees for the 12 different agencies and offices, and helps it further embed. So that structure was something that was different, and the funding that in the office was key, because it's one thing, again, it's great to support, but when you put funding for staff and EJ liaisons and all of that, it helped. The work that I focus on is a variety. I have my own projects. We have an EJ strategy document that came out, and for the Office of the Secretary, just like in February. We have 34 different topics. Some of them are like, wow, how are we going to address Indigenous and tribal communities effectively? How are we going to look at metrics? How about equitable workforce for climate, clean energy, and so on. So those are ones now that I have to plan to implement. But at the same time, those 12 different agencies that I mentioned, they come and say, we're really excited to look at equity in our programs, our policy, and our grants. Can you help us? And that's another role. Then we also work with those undersecretaries, the governor's office, and the communities that have concern. So it's multifaceted is an understatement, but that's the work that I'm involved in.
So Crystal and I both work at the state, and something that I've learned in being at the state is that we really like complicated org charts. And we love acronyms. So Crystal and I, we have a dotted line to each other. I work for a different undersecretary. And I really appreciate this idea of a theory of change. What does that mean for a government? Does a government have a theory of change? Is a question that I had when I saw your question. We got the questions ahead of time, so that's
I hope the government has a theory.
That could be a whole conversation in itself. So I think that when we're in governmental spaces talking about change, that's really interesting because there's some tension there. The government is very good at sort of doing things the way that it has done them and being very slow to change. So, but I feel, another one of the questions was about hope, because I do feel hopeful about the government for a variety, not hopeful well, we can get into that, but our positions exist. They didn't exist before. And I, specifically in my role as Deputy Director of Climate Equity and Environmental Justice, I had been a part of developing a program for municipalities across the state that required them to center environmental justice and equity and engagement, and it funded them to actually practice this. And it's working, it's challenging, but it's happening. And so now I feel like my role is to do that, but for the state. Not at a statewide level, but to do it on behalf of the state. To what does it mean for the state to become a partner and not just be the above state role? And I feel like so much about what I am doing right now is how to become a partner on behalf of the state with all of the different entities that are out there. And that requires a lot of different skills, a lot of meetings. There's a lot of meetings that happen, and I really appreciate what you're saying, Crystal, in terms of you have to be able to read a room pretty fast. And I would say that for a long time I was a cocktail waitress, and that job gave me the most essential skills of my life. And it taught me how to read a room, because I'd have to read that table and understand their vibe, and because I had to work for that tip, so I had to figure it out. And being able to understand people's where they're at very quickly, so this way you can meet them where they're at, which it's not just a phrase, it actually means something to meet somebody where they're at, is a lot of work. And it's not always easily quantifiable by deliverables or what you are making happen, because it's really relationship based. So that's That's kind of my theory of change that I bring to my job. I don't know if the state would officially say that that's their theory of change.
I love that.
Very diplomatic.
Just want to be clear.
So I work for the Kresge Foundation, and if you're not familiar with the foundation, it's a national grant-making institution. We are 100 years old this year, and based in Southeast Michigan. We're just headquartered just outside of Detroit. The foundation is really focused on, through grant-making and social investing, we work to expand structures of equity and opportunity in U.S. cities. So we're city-focused. I, again, serve on the environment team, which is one of our 7 program teams, and our programmatic focus of the environment team is to really help cities tackle, combat, and adapt to climate change while advancing racial and economic justice. So what that looks like is we work to really elevate the inclusion, visibility, power of communities of color, people of color, equity-focused organizations that are working at the community and grassroots level. We also work to build the capacity and connectivity of change makers at local government. So we need government to be partners, and we really work with those who are, wanting to make change to support their capacity and connectivity and networks of practitioners. We increasingly try to find opportunities to merge those two together, right? Because when the rubber hits the road in implementation, we need community and the government to be working together. And then one of the key features of our program in particular is that we feel that for any community to truly be resilient in the face of climate change, you must be simultaneously mitigating greenhouse gas and adapting at the same time. So our focus is really about the simultaneous effects of both of those. So I just wanted to read a couple of quick things in terms of this is on our theory of change, but just assumptions that underline all the things that I just said in terms of how we work. So our assumptions that kind of underlie our strategy are, one, we know and affirm that climate change disproportionately, of course, affects people of color and low wealth who are adversely affected. So in order to take equitable climate actions, we believe that cities must reckon with the historical and ongoing neglect of the needs and interests of people of color and people with low income, and that achieving equitable climate action in U.S. cities requires a strong, well-resourced and well-networked movement of trusted nonprofit organizations and leaders who center climate justice, and then that local public sector action crafted in partnership with community leaders is necessary to reach goals equitably. And then finally, to ensure equity, effectiveness, and durability, climate change mitigation and adaptation must be developed together. So I mentioned that one. So those are the underbelly of why we do what we do and how we crafted our strategy. And so day to day for us, it's, my work is super fun because I get to work with the best and brightest nonprofit organizations across the country. I mean, we all do. And so for me, it's particularly being previously working for a nonprofit, a national nonprofit, now that I'm on the funder side, I feel like, I like to think anyway, that I have a much better understanding, right, of what the work actually entails. And a lot of my work is relationship building. I mean, we do read the proposals and make recommendations for grants, of course, but I like to say that my work really comes after the check is cut, right? And because we're strategic grant makers, we are trying to create and put innovation out in the field, right, around equitable climate resilience. And we do that in partnership with organizations who strongly believe in that are implementing that. So I cannot do anything without our grantee partners. And so being able to sit at kind of this 10,000-foot level to be able to, connect people across the ecosystem, because when you're working, you don't have often time to pick your head up and be like, what is that organization in Philly or Miami doing, right? And so I've been, for my 8 years at the foundation, I manage these kind of multi-year community of practices of a cohort of organizations. So the first 4 years was our Climate Resilience and Urban Opportunity Initiative, which really focused on capacity building for community-based groups. So it was them coming together, learning from each other, working together, peer, connectivity and TA. And then after that, we developed a new strategy in partnership with our health program called our Climate Change Health and Equity Initiative, which is similar kind of multi-year cohort model, again, where groups get to come together. In that sense, it's community-based health practitioners and health institutions to really strongly mobilize around climate action.
Yeah, so our theory of change, I would say, is most related to what Oleander already said, which is meet communities where they're at on the issues that they care most about. Our whole mission is underpinned by this idea that we are strengthened if we empower communities, right? And it's the kind of rising tides lift all ships, right? If we empower frontline communities, the people that have been disproportionately harmed and are continued to be disproportionately harmed, the rest of it will fall into place. There are misconceptions that these communities don't know what they need, that they don't know what they lack, that they don't know what their goals are. There are studies that show that people of color are more concerned about climate change than their white counterparts. And so, the communities that we work with, and I work in Kingston, New York, in New York's Hudson Valley, the 70% of the city of Kingston is classified as disadvantaged by the state. It has what I would say, surprisingly high BIPOC population, given that it's in the Hudson Valley, which is predominantly wealthy and white. And that is what you see in cities, right, in city pockets everywhere. Our mission is to empower communities to own and share renewable energy, create healthier buildings, and join in community wealth building to strengthen the resilience of the Hudson Valley in the face of climate change. And what comes at the front of that, the empower communities, guides every other piece of that for us. So I think I'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about my work, but I'm the executive director, I said that already, and I feel blessed to take the guidance of the community. We have established a community council, which is all BIPOC representatives and organizations in Kingston that we meet with every month. We talk about our programs. Our most recent meeting was on the split incentive between landlords and renters, right? Renters deserve better housing, landlords don't want to put money into it, and renters don't have any authority to make the changes, right? And then if they advocate for it and the landlord does make the improvements, they're probably going to kick them out and hike up the rent. And so, we spent an hour and a half just digging into that. Sometimes, and especially with the split incentive, there are not solutions yet. There's no, silver bullet or magical, wand that I can wave and make that issue less difficult. But in working with the community, I know that we are thinking about it all. We're developing a fund and we're working through underwriting criteria and the many ways that is exclusionary. And so if we have a seat at the table, and if we let community members have a seat at the table, and if we let them build their own tables, and then we quietly pull up a chair and sit behind them, really beautiful things happen. And so our theory of change is that you have to meet communities where they're at on the issues that they care most about, and let them have the power, like the institutional power, to the extent that you can. And because I'm the executive director, I get to wave that wand and say, yes, you have power, we're gonna listen to you. We had a program called the Healthy and Resilient Homes Program. We got feedback that resilient sucks in that name. And they said, are you insinuating that we haven't been resilient? And I'm like, no, we were talking about it like climate, like we want your homes to be climate resilient. And they're like, we're resilient. Floods happen, extreme heat happens. Like food is not coming in the front door, but we make it happen. We've been resilient since the beginning of time. Don't insinuate that you're the one that's gonna come in and change that. And we said, all right, we're resilient, it's the Healthy Homes Program. Like, tell us if you want another word, But it makes us think, and You know, I think about all the times where I have been the only woman of color in a room, especially the only woman of color like in her 20s, and I've like made some, what I think is like absolutely tiny suggestion, and everyone in the room is like, wow, that is revolutionary. You know, I had this one time where I'm in a room, it's all these, you know, old white solar guys, and they're talking about low-income solar. And they're like, you know, how do we get people to participate in low-income solar? And I'm like, well, and at the time there wasn't consolidated billing, so you would have to get 2 bills if you wanted to be in a community solar project, and you would have to pay them through direct deposit. And some people don't have bank accounts, or some people like cannot confidently say that on the same day each month you can take $100 out or $200 out. And I was like, well, do you think people could like choose what day they pay? You know, we all got rent due on the 1st. Beginning of the month is pretty hard. Can we choose the 16th? The 17th? Wow. Yeah, our system can do that. So you should do that, you know? So that's what it means, you know, it's silly examples, but not so silly, about what it means to have people in the room that are actually dealing with energy burden, that are actually dealing with outdated, inefficient homes, etc.
On this note, about the fact that sometimes you go into the community with like kind of like patronizing like opinion and view, and you tell them like I know what's best for you. Oleander, I think it's kind of like it's connected to your point to like understand like reading the table. So I wonder like at a state level, like in your role, like how do you deal with like which kind of like roadblocks do you face when you like engage? Do you face like roadblocks at all when you engage with the community? I guess so. Which do you think is like the main pain point, and how would you solve it?
There are many roadblocks, but I think that it's such a big question. I mean, I'm always sort of curious about how I'm the problem. Like, that's sort of where I start. Is, you know, like, and especially I think, you know, with the world of climate, we think that we know what's right. And we have gotten degrees in what is right. And this is where, like, what does it mean to integrate justice into the way that you think and to how you approach your work? Because the idea that you're going to any community with the answer is like ground zero for a roadblock. And I'm a big believer in like, okay, how do I change? How am I my own ground zero for making things different? And figuring out how do I both kind of take that back seat. How do I listen? How do I be a better listener to understand both the brilliance and the ideas, the needs that are coming out of communities, and then like almost work as like a funder, like on the back end be like, oh, this is a problem for DOT, the Department of Transportation. How do I get them involved, and what do I need to do to get them to understand the situation and kind of do some of the tying in? And that's sort of what I mean in terms of like, when the idea of engagement is pretty consistently extractive. And so the idea so then you have to ask yourself, how do you not be extractive? And then that means being in relationship. And being in relationship is a reciprocal process. You know, think about the people who you are actually in relationship with. Who is your community? You know, there is a friend of mine who was saying to me in a meeting the other day, she's like, you know, she's of the Nipmuc tribe, and she was like, I identify as Nipmuc, and the Nipmuc tribe claims me. So who claims you as a community? And think about how your community works. how do you relate to them? How do you want to be approached? And so I think that there's something about, in terms of like, when you hit a roadblock also, like, don't take it personally, just take some time, think about what you can do differently, and just be a little spacious and curious to the roadblock.
Crystal, to you now. We're talking a lot about communities, about your role like in government agency. We spoke about nonprofits, and we have also like the private sector. It's like there, and now there's this word corporate social responsibility, but then there's also like greenwashing, social washing. So how does the private sector engages with you on these topics? Do you reach out to them asking to like come in to develop this like work? Does he come to you to support? And in general, do you feel like communities, when the private sector are involved, are more or less skeptical about this conversation around environmental acting?
That's very layered, but it's a very good one. Just so you know, from my perspective, multi-sector partnership is something that I've always been supporting. I did a conference like 10 years ago for 4 years around a sustainable economy, and it had to do with government, business, nonprofit, community, academia coming together around sustainable solutions and equity. And then now, so glad, like at this point, people seeing like how that connects. But multi-sector partnership is key. So the role of corporate side, social good experience, is very important. They all are. And on the corporate side, one thing that I value, aside from they also house large, I value them because they house large groups of people, and if you can access them through their values, you can get to people's homes, and then the communities, and then the children's schools. So it was a great pipeline of engagement and messaging for something around climate action. I also value the corporates because I do need them to take climate actions and beyond just not say ESG or something that's greenwashing, but need them to then incorporate, follow codes and advance in ways that they're needed. But one way that I also value them is for the work that I do, especially around workforce planning, and knowing that while the state has certain goals and that we need a particular like 38,000 or so people to help us meet our goals, is in understanding, wow, the low-hanging fruit is to once people are trained or coming out of school or whatever talent pools they're moving into the climate and clean energy workforce, is to go into existing companies versus say, you're all going to become entrepreneurs. That's also too. But the role in companies in helping us with our climate planning and helping even with life science, and can they transfer that to climate tech? Like how do we see businesses as solutions that can help? How I work with it now, it's really just starting, because one of the things is around workforce. And while there's so much focus on, well, let's find the participants, let's find the trainers, I'm like, and then let's get them hired. And I said, well, is like the clean and climate companies, the contractors, vendors, even aware that there was a plan, a resilient mass plan from, I think, fall 2023, that said, these are the industries. Are they even aware that it's their industry? And are they even aware that, like, do they want to grow? Like, do they want to go, because they know from mass clean energy synergy studies that most of them are small or medium size. So does somebody want to go from 14 people to like 70? And do they have the financial means? Because that's a huge part of planning, that like the little details that you just can't miss. And so when I think of the private sector, I think about, are they aware of their role? And that has different layers. So I talked to Denise about that, but multi-sector is key. And again, government, business, nonprofit, community, academia, all working together. It's not one or the other. Certain people have strengths like federal, so thankful for this unprecedented flow of money and the policy, and then with that supports, but then the role of academia and the role of community, it's all connected. And business is one side there too, including their role in the communities that they're in, and how to be like an active citizen. There's so many different layers, but the business sector is good. And when I used to put on forums around trying to get business leaders to advance sustainability, because I didn't want to, it wasn't necessarily the Stony Hills or the other sustainable companies. I want the ones that didn't care, that didn't want to care, weren't concerned at the time about the market and customer base. I didn't want to talk to people who are like me. I went against that beast. I did the Federal Reserve Bank. You know, I did, because I'm like, if I'm going to do it, let's do it right. And to attract business people to understand the value of sustainability. And that's always something that stuck with me, that meeting people where they're at, and everyone has a role. Everybody has a role.
I really want to leave time for your questions. So, Shamar, I'm just going to ask you one last question before moving to the audience. Going back to the point that Crystal made about like building this sort of like coalition, the messaging piece is super important, and also the narrative you build around it. And I feel that the narrative around climate change has also always been like catastrophic and about like sacrifices. You were mentioning floods, Oleander. I feel like you just see like hurricanes, floods, everything is horrible, and everyone has like a price to pay. And so it's not super like sexy and appealing for people to jump into this. So can we move this narrative and make it about opportunities and not sacrifices?
Yeah, in our team meetings, we're always like, we have some people on the team who, no matter what, is always doom and gloom, and then the other side, we're like, no. So yes, I think there are many opportunities to do so. First, before just in terms of the messaging, just to touch on what was already said in terms about our trust and listening to the community, is that we have to kind of unlearn, even in terms of how we message, we have to unlearn a lot of things about how we even talk about climate, right? And part of that is unlearning who we consider experts, right? We've talked about this a lot, but a lot of our work has been around telling the stories of what's working on the ground. So if you look at some of the strongest state level climate policies, a lot of in the last 5 years, they have been led by multiracial, diverse coalitions of multi-stakeholder participants, right? And so that, even in that storytelling of how that happened, it changes the story. It helps us unlearn about like, how does this change even happen, right? So then by telling those stories of the Portland Clean Energy Fund that was led by, you know, a people of color led state coalition, or telling the story of the first cumulative impacts ordinance that started by an organization in Newark. It was a city level, then it became state level, now it's a model for other communities. By telling these stories, we're able to show the bright spots of what happens when we engage everybody, right? That we can no longer leave the communities left behind, who are most impacted left behind. And so I think that's one important thing, to like begin to tell stories of community innovation, community leadership, and make it very tangible. So like, oh, this is an actual policy now, right? And then of course, as we see all of this money coming out of the federal government, like the amazing opportunities that we will have to tell the stories of this is the way we retool this economy, right? And so I think the opportunities there, yes, it's doom and gloom, yes, more climate disasters, but if we are able to tell a different story about what's not only at stake, but the opportunity for everyone to have a role to play in retooling, re-energizing, right, this entire economy that can center people and who've been left behind, who have solutions, right? And we all play a role together. I think that's the opportunity we have to tell a completely different story. We have to show people what it can look like.
Jasmine, do you wanna have a last word on this?
Sure. We're talking a lot about partnerships, and I would love to just highlight a little bit of my work because we have a lot of very diverse partners. Like I told you about our mission before, and we're working directly with the city of Kingston. We have a great relationship with them. They have actually, contracted with us to lead the energy programming of the city. Our Healthy Homes program came out of the work of a local coalition, like totally unofficial, no 501c3 status, no fiscal sponsor, just a group called Hudson Valley Air Quality that started working with Bard College's Citizen Science Lab and doing air quality monitoring and mold testing in renter-occupied units in Kingston, finding really horrific levels of mold that affect people's health. They had no funding available for this. They, eventually started putting in some immediate interventions, which are really just air quality air purifiers, air filters. It is the best that they can do, but I come in as an energy person, my first thought is like, ooh, what's that doing to their energy bills? You got them running 3 air filters 24/7, right? We had money set aside for a demonstration project that before I came on as ED, they thought was gonna go to some data platform. They're like, we're gonna have this platform and it's gonna be high tech and we're gonna model building savings. And I was like, guess what? I just heard that there's toxic mold in low-income households. No, we're not. And I made a pitch to the board, and the board was like, yes, this is definitely where this money should go. And we reallocated $400,000 for this project, which in building remediation is nothing. But it's, we actually just launched this. Applications are coming in now for folks, and people are going to get between $5,000 and $20,000 of work. That came directly out of the learnings from the community. And we're developing a tiered community investment fund as well, originally called Mid-Hudson Energy Equity Fund, rebranded to the Home Energy Loan Program, or HELP. I was proud of that one. And we're giving out 2% interest loans. And in that one, we're partnering with the state. In New York State, we're partnering with NYSERDA, our state energy agency, to get a loan loss reserve, because these are unsecured loans. We're not requiring a certain credit score. We're not taking a lien out on your home. We're really looking at the viability of the project that you want to do, the decarbonization or energy efficiency. We're allowing people to use this money on the pre-efficiency barriers that nobody's funding, right? And lead, mold, asbestos remediation. Everyone's so hot on heat pumps, like, oh yeah, you gotta get heat pumps in everyone's home. Okay, well that's gonna skyrocket their energy bills. And the folks in our territory, 1 in 4 people has utility debt. 1 in 4 people is behind at least 2 months on their electricity bills. I'm not putting in a heat pump until they've properly weatherized their home, and we can't do that if they have toxins inside that we're trapping them in with. And so we developed this fund. We have a philanthropic interest rate buy down, so we're able to offer 2% interest loans, but we're accepting investments from philanthropy, and also impact investors, so bringing in, the kind of corporate folks, they can get a 3% return, and community non-accredited investors, so just everyday folks can invest in this fund and get a 4% return. So we tiered it where if you're a community investor, you actually have the highest ROI. And at the same time, we're giving out these 2% interest loans. We have a rainy day fund, also funded by philanthropy. So if someone has volatile income and they need to miss a payment, we can pull from this rainy day fund so that they don't get behind on their payments, so that it's not compounding or affecting their credit score. So, I just mentioned the state, philanthropy, our city government, local coalitions. We have a technical partner called Power Market. They handle our community solar subscriptions and all the back-end technology that I don't really want to deal with. it is a huge effort. And so when it's grounded in community, when you do bring in everyone, you're all going to be better for it. You know, I think it is, we've all said this in one way or another, but when justice is at the core of the work, we really do truly all benefit from it.
Thank you. I have like actual questions. Maybe when you ask your question, you can briefly introduce yourself and also specific to one speaker.
Thank you for the presentation. It was really insightful. I have a question for all of you, practically. So I'm a postdoc at CMES, Center for Middle Eastern Studies. I work on oases that are on the verge of collapse, oases in the south of Tunisia especially. And I work on processes of dispossession, like land dispossession and water dispossession, and how we moved from water commoning to water contest. And I think it's a sample of what could happen if we talk about climate crisis, because it's a 100% built environment. It's man-made. It's 2,000 years ago, but it was made like 3 or even 3,000 years ago. But it's a great example of sustainability and resilience, like you say. So the turning point was actually a discussion with my grandmother, because I was talking about commons and Nobel Prize talking about governing the commons and permaculture, and she said permaculture is only a fancy word to explain how agriculture is done in the oasis, and commons, you don't need the Nobel Prize to talk about that, because we did it, like we used to do it. So I'm in between research and activism, and I'm struggling with the funding part. Always that. So my question is, it's really hard to find, even here in Harvard, funding that are directed to North Africa and the MENA region. And I think there is no climate justice if we don't talk about decolonizing practices. I'm talking about design. I'm a designer, so I'm talking about decolonizing design practices, decolonizing imaginaries, and that's how we got to the crisis, actual crisis in the oasis. So how can we move from this extractivist economy to a resource economy, something like that? And what I did is future workshops with local municipalities, activists. Like I said, it's always the funding part that is missing, and that's what I want to ask you all.
How do we fund all of this? I don't know, like to take this question. Shamar, as your hand. You're good. Okay.
So unfortunately, I don't have a lot to say, unfortunately, about funding in North Africa. I just don't know enough about the funding there, but the funding is always a challenging part. I mean, it is the most challenging. How do we fund all of this? And even out of philanthropic funds, I mean, we're a small piece of the pie, right? And so we're going back to, we need everyone. We need private sector allies, right? We need public sector allies. Just now in the United States, we're seeing for the first time historic funding levels for climate change, right? We're way behind in terms of what we need. So I maybe my state friends have more to say. I don't have any really good suggestions other than the work we've all been talking about in terms of trying to bring everyone to bear, particularly unlocking private sector dollars of allies who will want to do, who are willing to do things in a different way and not the same business as usual in terms of how money is deployed, is really essential. But it's a massive issue and problem, because the scope of the scale and scope of what we need, we don't have enough resource. We have enough resources. We do not have enough people who are willing to deploy the resources in the ways in which we know we need them to be, with justice at the center. So not a really helpful answer to your immediate issue, but yeah.
Well, I just wanted to first say you should meet Yusuf Adam, who is my former intern. Shout out to Yusuf. Not here, I was just
Okay.
pointing at the camera because I'm going to send him later. But he's from Sudan and he works on the water energy nexus. I could see what you all are doing really aligning. He's also a brilliant researcher. I would definitely say creativity is key. I'm one of those people that could not go into corporate America, like it's not for me. And I'm building a culture of my org where people can really show up as themselves and be themselves, etc. I believe that we need a lot of entrepreneurship. Of course, people need to join the ranks of existing organizations, but it sounds like your skill set is really diverse and that there can be ways to monetize that, raise money in other ways first, before going to kind of that passion project where you need like large amounts of grant funding. I feel like in this role now, I have learned like I can do anything, and people have done more on less, and so just I would say like really believe in yourself and put your all into it, and the right doors will open at the right times, but get creative and use all of your skills, and like what makes you unique. That's what's worked for me.
And I wanted to build on that. You're going to have to do some extensive research, but you'll be at it. But bringing in your creative and critical thinking. So I had worked with a Tanzanian youth organization there, and they kind of asked the same question. And I said, it's going to be a journey, but you need to investigate. And they found first in some of the Nordic countries organizations that had regions for first and most relevant and got some funding. But also then it was around, you didn't have to have an entrepreneurial approach, is that finding out what are those corporate companies around and then engaging them for helping to support, whether you're tying it into workforce, because it behooves them to want to invest in an impactful community. So you're going to have to think about your creative writing skills to be
when
able.
The state is the problem.
Say it again.
When the state is the problem.
But I'm not saying you have to go to the state.
I know, but when you have to face the state, that is the problem.
Yes.
The state is doing extractivist
For that, yes.
economies.
Yes.
That's the thing. That's why when it's.
Well, if it's, and I'm sorry if I did not understand the full scope of what you're saying, if there are issues, because there's adverse impacts and what that means, public health, ecologically, economically, and so forth, on that one, you do need to also still be creative for the company that is extracting. Everybody usually has somebody that they value and report to. And you need to find their Achilles heel. That's true, you do. You have to leverage that. And it will take creative, and it may not be what you thought, but it can be done. You just have to connect those dots in a creative way. Because in areas where, especially with extracting and mining, it's extremely destructive. However, they know there's some sustainable solution in saying, you know what, I'm going to get more. What are they extracting?
Phosphate.
Was it?
Phosphate.
Okay.
To transform it, so they taking phosphate from an oasis, taking it to another one, that is my hometown, and to transform it into chemical fertilizers for agro-industry.
Right. Right.
It's like 30% of the.
I was just trying to try to figure out for who that's marketing towards, to say they would probably do better and have more product if they had cleaner practices, because that's a marketing angle. And so finding out who do they buy, who buys their product, and saying your other customer base will do better and support more if it's sustainable. And it has a ripple out effect, because money that's creating the problem, because extracting will also have the potential then you to leverage, you can find out which string. But it gets complicated, but you do have to be creative in connecting those dots on sustainable solutions. because I was to say, because on the other side, been in the situation where you're trying to minimize pollution, and there's a balance, because if that closes and the economic hardships, then people get perturbed for another reason. So you're happy in one thing, so it's an interesting balance in that.
If you
I
don't-
wish you success.
We could like continue this
Yes.
conversation for like hours probably, and
Yes.
I know there are a lot of other questions, but unfortunately we are at time. But Crystal, Oleander, Shamar, and Jasmine are gonna stay here for dinner, so you're more than welcome to ask them questions directly. Before moving to the other room for dinner, 30 seconds answer to, are you optimistic about this whole movement towards environmental justice and climate equity? Jasmine is not optimistic. Not.
Cautiously optimistic. Where my optimism does come from is looking at the team that I'm building. You know, it's really different for me to be in this type of leadership role where I can just be like, we're gonna do the right thing, like every day. What makes me optimistic though is being in this leadership role where I get to do the right thing every day. I'm not, you know, going to my supervisor and saying, hey, can we like do this EJ thing? And they're like, no, you know. So I think that makes me optimistic, and I hope that there's many more opportunities for folks to take leadership roles that really have this at their core. And if the role doesn't exist, create it.
I am optimistic. It's frustrating that a thesis paper I wrote out almost 30 years ago, I'm still working on the exact same issues. That is frustrating, but it also makes me super optimistic that for the first time ever, we have some of those same people I studied at the highest level of government, advising the highest level of government, and historic funding coming out focused on EJ. And I believe in the power of people to affect change. And so people power is always something I'm never gonna give up on. So yeah, I'm optimistic.
I am also optimistic. Maybe that's like a theme that's happening already. But my optimism doesn't mean that I think that we're gonna solve the problem. My optimism is in the beautiful relationships that people can form and in the power of the people. I am optimistic that our human spirit is something to be deeply valued. And I know that like I said, I spend a lot of time outside, you know, and I watch a lot of plants. I watch the river change. I watch things change, and understanding how to change and watching, I get a great amount of joy from my community, being a queer community, a trans community, of people who have to change all the time. And that gives me joy and hope.
I am optimistic also for being in this field for so long, where before there wasn't this awareness or support, so excited for that now. I'm also really optimistic because you have your generation. Never before have you had from K through 12 and college and whatever you're studying, MBA and sustainability, MBA with equity, my gosh, like that was never, that's why I didn't do an MBA before, but having had that. The other thing that I'm optimistic in, because I don't think people understand what is coming regarding the climate crisis. And they can't fathom it. It scares me, it can actually bring tears to my eyes. But that situation, as we're learning more collaboration and the power of community, and that's slowly happening, that's gonna be the only thing where some of the situation's coming through. And I'm not foolishly hopeful that what changes will have to come for how people engage to get through these crises, that on the other side will be a new model, and we will get there, but it's not gonna be a smooth ride. But it'll be an interesting journey around equity during a climate crisis, and that will be coming.
Thank you. So, just want to remind you that this is an episode of a broader series, and so we're meeting again on April 24th for a session about careers in climate related to consulting. So you're all welcome to come. There is dinner served in the other room, but please join me in thanking our amazing speakers. So thank you.